Barack Obama sat quietly under the lights, holding a sheet of paper. Seconds later, Donald Trump was shouting down a phone line on national television. The contrast told America everything it needed to know. The cameras were already rolling. When Barack Obama leaned back in his chair, his expression was calm, collected, the kind of face that gave nothing away. The town hall wasn't supposed to be explosive. It was billed as a conversation about the economy, about the struggles of everyday Americans, trying to put food on the table after months of political back and forth. But everyone in that studio, Phoenix, Arizona, could feel something different brewing. The network anchors had hyped it up. For days, the former president, returning to primetime television, not for a book tour or a casual interview, but to speak on the state of the nation directly. And this wasn't just any night. Millions were watching live, waiting to hear what he had to say. Sitting under the studio lights with audience members shifting in their seats, Obama adjusted his tie and gave a polite smile to the host. The host, Mark Hanley, a seasoned journalist, known for asking blunt questions, wasted no time. He leaned forward with a stack of papers in hand and said, "Mr. President, a lot of Americans are struggling right now. The White House has claimed that this relief package is one of the most successful in history. Do you agree with that assessment?" The studio went quiet. You could almost hear people breathing. Everyone knew this wasn't just a question. It was a test. How far would Obama go in critiquing the sitting president? On live TV, Obama didn't rush. He took a sip of water, placed his glass gently on the table, and looked directly into the camera. Then he said slowly, "Well, Mark, I think the American people deserve facts, not slogans." His voice was steady, almost casual, but it cut through the room like a knife. That sentence alone set the tone. It wasn't a jab, it wasn't a rant, it was deliberate, and in that moment, the audience could sense it. Something significant was about to happen. Meanwhile, across the country, in the White House residence, Donald Trump was watching. Advisors had urged him to skip it, telling him it was just another TV appearance, nothing to worry about. But Trump didn't skip it. He was glued to the screen, arms folded, remote in hand, waiting for what he believed would be more of the same political theater. But the cameras back in Phoenix told a different story. The way Obama carried himself, quiet, assured, almost surgical in tone, felt more like a courtroom cross-examination than a political commentary. The people in the audience leaned forward in their seats. Some had lost jobs. Others had seen their small businesses shut down to them. This wasn't theater. This was about survival. Obama reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper. The sound of it crinkling filled the silence. He held it up, casually, as though he had brought it along just in case. Then, looking back at Hanley, he said, "These numbers aren't mine. They come straight from the Treasury Department." The host's eyebrows shot up. People in the front rows exchanged glances. The energy shifted for a brief second. Even the camera seemed to zoom in tighter, as though sensing the weight of what was about to be revealed. The hook wasn't just the numbers themselves. It was the calm confidence of a man who had done his homework. Obama didn't have to raise his voice, didn't have to gesture wildly. His tone alone suggested that what he was holding wasn't a political stunt, but hard evidence. In the control room, producers scrambled, feeding lines into the host's earpiece, wondering how far this would go. On Twitter, hashtags began to pop up within minutes. Hashtag Obama Live. Hashtag Town Hall Shock. Have relief. Truth. The internet was catching fire before the match had even touched the fuel. And still, Obama hadn't even read the numbers aloud yet. All he had done was set the stage in the White House. Trump's grip on the remote tightened. His advisors looked uneasy, exchanging nervous glances. They knew the former president wasn't just speaking to the studio audience. He was speaking to the entire nation. Back in Phoenix, Obama finally glanced down at the paper, then back into the camera. He gave the faintest smile, the kind that said, "I'm about to show you something you can't ignore." But the real shock hadn't even landed yet. It was only seconds away. The air inside the Phoenix Convention Center was thick with anticipation. Rows of chairs stretched from the stage all the way back to the rafters, packed with an audience that had waited for hours just to catch a glimpse of history in the making. Some wore masks, pulled down around their chins. Others clutched notebooks. But near everyone had a phone in hand, ready to capture a moment. They could tell their children about Mark Hanley. The host leaned back in his chair, visibly aware that he was sitting between two legacies: the quiet dignity of Barack Obama and the looming presence of a sitting president. Watching from afar, cameras pivoted across the room, capturing faces: young college students in hoodies, Retirees, in denim jackets, families balancing restless kids on their laps. What united them was the same question, gnawing at the country. Was the government really helping ordinary people, or had relief money vanished into boardrooms and balance sheets behind the scenes? The production crew whispered frantically through headsets. The executive producer, sweating under the glow of monitors, knew they had struck television gold. The ratings were spiking by the minute. But the crew wasn't the only group paying attention. In Washington, the White House communications team scrambled to draft possible responses in case Obama landed a serious blow. They hadn't expected him to come armed with paperwork on stage. Obama unfolded the sheet again, this time laying it flat on the table, as if he were about to teach class. He didn't rush. He adjusted his glasses, glanced once at Hanley, then looked directly into the lens that was the moment. The broadcast transformed from a simple Q&A into something far more consequential. The silence was gripping. Even the sound of a chair squeaking in the audience made Pete flinch. Then Obama spoke. According to the Treasury Department, as of last week, only 38% of the relief funds had reached working families and small businesses. He paused, letting the numbers settle like dust in the air. Meanwhile, over 55% was directed to corporations, many of them already profitable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. A man in the back shook his head, muttering something under his breath. People weren't just hearing numbers, they were hearing confirmation of suspicions they had carried for months. Hanley, caught between journalist and referee, cleared his throat. So, Mr. President, you're saying that what we've been told from the White House doesn't line up with what these official figures show? Obama leaned back, folded his hands, and gave a small shrug. I'm not saying anything that isn't printed right here. These are not my numbers. These are the government's own numbers. The audience murmured louder now, the sound rising like a wave. For viewers at home, the contrast was impossible to ignore. The calm delivery of a man who seemed prepared for every detail, versus the bluster they knew was about to come. Pennsylvania Avenue, in living rooms across the country, from a trailer park outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, to a cafe in downtown Portland, Oregon, people stopped what they were doing to stare at their screens. A single mom folding laundry dropped a shirt, mid-fold, eyes fixed on the TV. A retired mechanic sitting at his kitchen table let his coffee go cold, gripping the mug tighter with each word. Obama continued, his voice steady, but with a sharper edge. Now the relief was supposed to keep small businesses open, supposed to put money in the pockets of folks struggling to make rent, but what actually happened, too much of it, ended up padding corporate accounts. That's not opinion, that's fact. Hanley leaned forward, eyebrows raised. And you're saying this directly contradicts what the president has been telling the public? For the first time, Obama allowed a flicker of dry humor to surface. Well, I'd say the numbers have a way of speaking for themselves. You can call them inconvenient, but you can't call them fake. The crowd erupted in applause, short and sharp like a verdict delivered. Meanwhile, on social media, the moment spread like wildfire. Clips were already being shared with captions like "Obama drops truth, live and receipts, don't lie." Trending hashtags pulled in millions of views. Within minutes, journalists from networks not even carrying the broadcast began posting snippets, knowing they couldn't afford to ignore the story. Back in Washington, Trump's aides were pacing one. A young press officer named Brent Keenan was already typing furious drafts for a rebuttal. "We need to hit back now," he said, his voice cracking with urgency. Another aide muttered, "He's going to blow up when he sees this." And blow up he did. Trump, watching from the White House residence, stood up so abruptly, his glass of Diet Coke sloshed onto the carpet. He's lying right there on TV." He barked, his face red with fury. But in Phoenix, Obama hadn't raised his voice once. He closed the folder, set it aside, and folded his hands again. "This isn't about politics, it's about people, and the government can't be honest about who it's helping. Then folks deserve to know the truth." The applause rose again, longer this time, echoing through the hall. Cameras swept across the audience, catching teary eyes, clenched jaws, and nodding heads. People weren't just hearing numbers, they were saw someone put those numbers into plain words, words that resonated with their own struggles. But as the cheers swelled, the tension in Washington was swelling too, because Trump wasn't going to stay silent. Mark Hanley adjusted his chair, leaning closer to Obama, as if proximity alone could draw out more of the truth. His eyes flicked to the paper resting on the table between them, then back to the former president's calm face. The studio lights bore down, making the tension visible in every furrowed brow of the audience members. Hanley cleared his throat again. "Mr. President," he said carefully, "let me be very direct with you. The White House has gone on record multiple times claiming that over 70% of these funds went to families, to everyday workers. But what you're showing us right now doesn't match that. So are you saying the current administration has misled the American people? It was a question hanging in the air, the one everyone had tuned in to hear, asked out loud. People leaned forward in their seats, breaths shallow for a moment. Obama didn't respond. He rested his hands in his lap, eyes steady, letting the silence draw out. Silence can be louder than shouting. And in that pause, the nation leaned, even closer to its screens. Finally Obama spoke. Mark, I'm not here to play pundit or sling accusations, but let's call things what they are. When the numbers the government itself puts out don't align with the statements being made from the podium, that's not a misunderstanding, that's a choice. The weight of his words dropped hard. The crowd murmured, some gasping audibly. Hanley glanced at the audience, then back at Obama, sensing that the moment was building into something bigger than a soundbite. Obama continued, his tone sharp but never losing its steady rhythm. You've families in places like Yuma, Arizona, or Wichita, Kansas, trying to stretch a relief check that barely covers groceries. You've got barbershops in Detroit that couldn't keep the lights on because their applications for aid were stalled. Meanwhile, companies already sitting on cash reserves cashing in. If the administration wants to call that success, that's their right. But the people living through it, they know better. The camera cut to the audience, a young woman holding her baby, her eyes wet with tears, an older man shaking his head, lips pressed tight. These weren't abstract statistics to them. This was their rent, their prescriptions, their survival. Hanley shifted in his seat. So in your view, this isn't about partisanship, it's about honesty. Obama nodded once. Exactly, and honesty should not depend on who holds office. That line hit the room like a thunderclap. Applause broke out again, but this time it wasn't immediate. It was slower, so heavier, more deliberate, like people needed a moment to absorb it before responding. Back in Washington, Trump's living room was chaos. Aides hovered nervously, whispering over one another. He's calling you a liar. One said this isn't Bush. Another muttered. Trump snapped, it's fake news. All of it. He grabbed his phone, thumbs flying across the screen, crafting a tweet, even as Obama kept speaking. But inside the Phoenix studio, Obama stayed firmly in control. Hanley pressed further, sensing history being made. Mr. President, some might say you're accusing the sitting president of deception. On live national television, are you prepared for the backlash? Obama leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. His voice softened, almost conversational. The way someone talks when they want to cut through the noise. Backlash doesn't feed families. Backlash doesn't pay rent. If telling the truth brings criticism, then so be it. I'd rather folks be angry at me for being honest than comforted by a lie. The audience broke into applause again. Longer, louder. This time it wasn't the applause of partisanship. It was the applause of recognition. People weren't hearing a politician's talking points. They were hearing what sounded like the truth in living rooms across America. Viewers exchanged glances. A grandmother in Flagstaff whispered to her husband, he's saying what we've all been thinking. A truck driver parked at a rest stop outside Amarillo slapped the steering wheel and muttered, finally someone's telling it straight. Obama held up the paper one more time, tapping it gently with his finger. These aren't my words. These aren't my numbers. They're your government's, and if your government isn't being straight with you, you just to ask why. Hanley swallowed, his voice a little shaky, as he asked his next question. Do you believe this moment tonight will change the conversation? Obama offered a faint smile. Conversations don't change because of me, Mark. They change because the American people demand better. The words hung in the air and the audience roared again, clapping and cheering even through the TV screen. The energy was palpable. This wasn't just another talking head on cable news. It was a moment of contrast so sharp that it would ripple through the country in real time. But while the audience was rising to its feet, Trump was rising too, and he wasn't about to let Obama have the stage without a fight. The audience hadn't even settled from their applause when Obama leaned in, lowering his voice slightly, as if he were letting them in on a secret. He tapped the sheet of paper again, eyes never leaving the camera. Want to read you a line? Word for word, he said. This is directly from the Treasury Department's report. The room went silent. You could hear the faint shuffling of feet, the creak of a chair as someone leaned forward. Obama cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses and read slowly. Section relief funds distributed to corporations, with annual revenues exceeding $5 billion. 55%. He paused, letting the figure linger. Section 6. Line 9. Relief funds directly deposited into small business accounts. 12%. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Someone in the crowd whispered, 12, for the microphone to pick it up. Another voice, angrier, barked, that's a joke. The camera panned across rows of shocked faces, hands covering mouths, eyes wide in disbelief. Obama set the paper down gently. He didn't need to embellish. He didn't need to editorialize the numbers. Spoke louder than any speech could. This was meant to help families, folks who've lost their jobs, folks trying to keep the lights on. Instead, what we're looking at is a bailout for the wealthy. The weight of his words pressed down on the room. In that moment, you could almost feel the audience uniting. Not as Democrats as Republicans, but as people realizing they had been misled. Mark Hanley leaned forward visibly. Rattled, his journalistic instincts told him to push further. But the shock in the room made him hesitate. Still he asked, so you're saying, Mr. President, that the administration knowingly pushed a false narrative to the public? Obama didn't flinch. I'm saying the facts are here for anyone to read. If the administration said something different, then the question isn't whether I'm calling them out. It's whether the American people are okay being told one thing while the truth says another. The crowd erupted again, louder than before, clapping and cheering. Some even stood up, fist in the air. The camera caught a man in a faded Phoenix Suns hat, turning to his wife saying, "He's got the receipts right there." Meanwhile in Washington, Trump's patience snapped. He paced across the carpet in the White House residence, ranting to his aides, "He's lying. Those numbers are wrong. Somebody needs to stop him." His aides tried to calm him, but he was too far gone. He grabbed his phone and fired off a tweet. Obama spreading fake numbers on live TV. Total disgrace. America knows the truth. The tweet flew across screens within seconds. But instead of dampening Obama's moment, it fueled it. Commentators online started posting screenshots of the Treasury report. Fact-checkers chimed in and hashtags multiplied. Had receipts, don't lie. Had Obama vs. Trump, had truth. Live back in Phoenix, Hanley pressed harder, sensing that the conversation had shifted from discussion to confrontation. Even if Trump wasn't physically in the room. "Mr. President," Hanley asked, "if the facts are so clear, why hasn't anyone else called this out?" Obama leaned back, his face calm, because calling out the truth takes preparation. It takes patience, and sometimes it takes the willingness to stand in the fire. A lot of folks are scared of what happens when you challenge power. But I'm not in office anymore. I've got nothing to lose. By saying what the data already shows. The words echoed bold and unflinching. Audience roared, once more, louder than ever, as though a collective exhale had finally been released. On the split screen, viewers at home could see two very different realities. Obama in Phoenix, steady and composed, letting the facts speak, and Trump in Washington, red-faced and animated, yelling in his phone, while aides scrambled around him. The contrast was stark, impossible to ignore. At a diner in Albuquerque, customers sat glued to a mounted television, forks suspended midair as Obama's words rang out. A waitress stopped wiping down tables, muttering, "He just called him out," without even saying his name. At a gas station outside Reno, a group of drivers clustered around a phone, replaying the clip again and again, shaking their heads in disbelief. Obama ended the segment with a simple statement. America doesn't need more spin. America needs honesty, and if that honesty makes people uncomfortable, that's because the truth usually does. The applause was deafening. The studio audience stood as one, cheering and clapping, while the cameras captured every second of it. But as the crowd in Phoenix cheered, the real storm was only beginning. Because Trump was about to respond live and wouldn't be measured or calm. The moment Obama laid the papers flat and let his words sink in, the studio erupted into a storm of clapping and shouts. Mark Hanley raised a hand, trying to regain order. But even he knew this was the clip that would dominate headlines. For days, the control room upstairs was chaos. Producers barked into headsets. Camera operators were told to hold tight on Obama's face, and a social media coordinator was already clipping the footage to push across platforms. But it wasn't just the studio audience reacting. Across the nation, homes, restaurants, even airports turned into viewing parties. At a bar in Phoenix, televisions mounted above the counter blared the broadcast. Patrons dropped their conversations mid-sentence. One man slapped his palm on the counter and said, to nobody in particular, "Finally, somebody's saying it." In Dallas, a group of nurses on their break huddled around a phone, replaying Obama's calm delivery over and over, shaking their heads as if to confirm they hadn't misheard. And in Fresno, a farmer leaned against his truck, listening to the audio stream through his radio, muttering, "I knew it. I damn well knew it." The internet caught fire almost instantly. Twitter feeds exploded with hashtags. Obama live, had truth on air. Receipts don't lie. Within 10 minutes, clips of Obama reading those figures had racked up millions of views. TikTok users spliced the footage with their own reactions,
jaws dropping, hands covering faces. Sarcastic captions scroll across the screen. Meanwhile, journalists sitting in the back rows of the Phoenix Convention Center typed furiously, sending real-time updates to their editors. Headlines began to hit the wire. Obama drops Treasury numbers live. Former president contradicts Trump. Relief claims town hall bombshell rocks. Washington. In the White House, the mood shifted from unease to outright panic. Trump's aides hovered around him, like firefighters circling the blaze. They couldn't put out one aide. Brent Keenan held his phone up with trembling hands. Mr. President, it's trending everywhere, you're the top, hashtag. Not in a good way. Trump's face reddened. This is lies, pure lies. Why isn't anyone fact-checking him? Where's Fox? Get me on the phone with somebody right now. He stormed across the room barking orders. Another aide whispered, sir, we can arrange a call in to Patriot News tonight. They're live now. Trump whipped around, pointing a finger. Do it. I'm not waiting. The aide sprinted down the hall, dialing frantically while Trump snatched up his phone again. Another tweet fired off. Obama should be ashamed of himself. Total liar. America knows better. Back in Phoenix, Obama remained seated, head folded, calm as ever. Hanley tried to push the conversation forward, asking questions about solutions, about what could be done differently, but Obama's tone never shifted. The solution is simple, he said. Be honest about where the money went. Then fix it. If you can't admit the problem, you can't fix it. Audience members nodded, murmuring their agreement. The tension wasn't one of partisanship anymore. It was a collective frustration, crystallized in a single broadcast. Then the whispers started. A producer leaned into Hanley's earpiece. Trump's about to go live. He's calling in to Patriot News. Hanley's eyes widened, but he didn't break his composure. He simply asked Obama one more question.
Do you believe the president will respond to what you've said tonight? Obama gave a small smile. He usually does. The timing was uncanny. Less than 2 minutes later, televisions across the country split their screens on the left. Obama sat calm and composed. In Phoenix on the right, the blared, breaking news. President Trump calls in live. Trump's voice thundered through speakers. This is fake, all fake. The so-called numbers he's waving around are not real. It's disgraceful. Obama is trying to tear down America with lies. I've given more money to the American people than anyone in history. More than any president, period. The contrast was brutal. Obama sitting calmly, hands folded, Trump's voice, angry and fast, echoing down phone lines. Words tumbling over one another. In living rooms, people exchanged glances. A college student in Sacramento laughed out loud. He sounds like he's losing it. A grandmother in Tampa shook her head. Why is he yelling? If the numbers are wrong, shouldn't he just show us the real ones? Back in Phoenix, Obama didn't even flinch. Hanley raised an eyebrow and asked, would you like to respond to the president's comments? Obama leaned slightly toward the mic. I don't need to respond. The report already did. The crowd roared again, drowning out Trump's voice. Producers in the control room scrambled, toggling audio levels as the two feeds competed for dominance. But the optics were clear. One man steady, composed, factual. The other defensive and furious. Social media lit up again. Memes flooding timelines within minutes. Side-by-side screenshots of Obama's calm expression and Trump's all-caps tweets spread like wildfire on Facebook. One post read, this is the difference between a leader and a man obsessed with saving face in the White House. Trump slammed his phone onto the table. They're cheering him. Why are they cheering him? His aide stayed silent, knowing no answer would satisfy him. But the real blow wasn't just the reaction in Phoenix. It was how quickly America outside those walls began to pick sides. Trump's voice bellowed through the phone line, every word spilling out faster than the last. It's disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. Obama's lying to the American people. He's a failed president, and now he's trying to make me look bad because he can't stand how successful I am. Nobody's been more successful than me. No. His words carried live on national television, echoed like a storm, rolling in the Phoenix studio. The audience shifted in their seats, glancing up at the split screen. On one side, Obama, composed, hands folded neatly, watching quietly. On the other, Trump's voice, angry, frantic, charging ahead like a freight train. Without brakes. Mark Hanley, caught in the middle of history, tried to hold the reins. Mr. President, he interjected over the phone. We have the former president here, with the Treasury's own report. Are you saying the report itself is false? Trump snapped back immediately. Yes. Absolutely false. Total garbage. You know, they make mistakes all the time. People and government bureaucrats, they screw things up, they cook numbers, they leak fake data to hurt me. Everybody knows it, gasps rippled through the studio. Obama remained still, eyes locked on the host, refusing to engage directly. Contrast couldn't have been sharper. One man rattled and defensive. The other measured, waiting for the dust to settle back in Washington. Trump paced like a caged animal, phone clutched to his ear. His aides trailed behind, whispering, urging him to calm down. But he waved them off. No, I've got to set the record straight. They're watching me. The people need to hear me fight. Meanwhile, on live television, his rant grew wilder. Look, I know more about the economy than anyone. I built the greatest economy the world has ever seen. And then China sent us the virus, and now Obama wants to come on TV and tell you lies about how I'm helping people. It's disgusting. He's jealous. That's what it is. Pure jealousy. In the Phoenix audience, murmurs turned into chuckles. A young man near the back muttered, "He sounds like my uncle after 3 cups of coffee." The crowd's reaction grew less tense, incredulous as Trump dug himself deeper. Hanley looked to Obama, raising an eyebrow silently, asking if he wanted to respond. Obama shook his head lightly, signaling he would wait. The silence said more than words ever could. At a bar in Tucson, people watching the split-screen coverage broke in laughter. "He's unraveling live," one man said, shaking his head. "He can't stand that someone called him out in a family home." In Boise, a mother turned to her teenage son and said softly, "See the difference? One man talks facts, the other just yells." The network smelled blood. Producers kept the split screen alive. The perfect visual: Obama steady and composed, Trump raging through a phone line. Analysts were already scribbling notes, preparing for the morning shows. One commentator whispered into his mic, "We are witnessing the moment public perception shifts." Trump, however, doubled down. "Nobody's been treated worse than me. Nobody, they're all against me. The media, the Democrats, even some Republicans. But I fight. I fight for the American people harder than anyone ever has." His voice cracked slightly as he repeated, "Harder than anyone ever has." For the first time, Obama moved. He leaned toward the mic, waiting for Trump to pause. When the host finally nodded to him, Obama said calmly, "I think the American people can decide for themselves who's telling the truth. I'll just point out again, these numbers aren't mine. They're the government's own. If the president wants to call his own Treasury Department fake, that's his choice." The audience exploded with applause, drowning out Trump's voice. Some stood clapping furiously while others cheered loud enough to shake the rafters. The split screen was almost comical now. Obama smiling faintly while the audio feed of Trump shouted over noise, sounding smaller by the second in the White House. Trump ripped the phone from his ear, slamming it down onto the desk. "They're clapping for him on live TV. They're supposed to be clapping for me." He kicked at the chair leg, sending it screeching across the floor. His aides exchanged uneasy glances. One aide whispered, "Sir, maybe we should hold off for tonight, regroup." Trump whirled on him, eyes blazing. "No regrouping. We hit back harder. I want every network, every friendly outlet saying Obama lied. Make calls, get it out there." But while his team scrambled to contain the damage, the public had already seen enough. The split screen told the story better than any headline could. Calm versus chaos. Facts versus fury. At the Phoenix Convention Center, Obama leaned back, glass of water in hand, and said simply, "At the end of the day, leadership isn't about how loud you shout. It's about whether people can trust what you say." The crowd rose again, their cheers rolling like thunder. But outside the studio, in diners, living rooms and break rooms across America, people were already debating what they had just witnessed. And those conversations would prove even more powerful than broadcast itself. The split screen stayed frozen on millions of televisions across the country, a perfect visual metaphor that nobody could have scripted better. On the left, Obama sat upright, calm, his hands folded loosely on the table, his eyes steady as if he were lecturing a classroom. Instead of nation, on the right, Trump's voice boomed through the speakers, frantic, almost desperate words, spilling so fast that viewers struggled to keep up. People at home didn't need pundits to explain what they were seeing. The contrast was crystal clear. In a coffee shop in Albuquerque, a group of college students stared at the television mounted on the wall. One of them laughed nervously. "You see that one guy's cool as ice," and the others screaming into a phone, like somebody stole his car. Another replied, "This isn't about politics anymore. It's about who you believe when everything's on the line." A small town barber shop outside Omaha, customers stopped mid-haircut, buzzing clippers,
falling silent. The barber turned toward the TV, shaking his head. That's the difference between confidence and panic. You can't fake. Calm back in Phoenix. Mark Hanley pressed his earpiece tighter as producer whispered. Updates ratings. Climbing viewership soaring past projections. The network had stumbled into a defining broadcast. Hanley, trying to remain composed, asked Obama one final question before the segment wrapped. Mr. President, some viewers are saying, this is less about numbers and more about leadership. How would you describe what's happening here tonight? Obama paused, glanced briefly at the audience, then spoke softly. Leadership isn't about proving you're right. It's about showing people the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. If your first reaction is anger, maybe you weren't being honest to begin with. The audience applauded again, but this time the sound was layered with something heavier. A kind of collective recognition. People weren't just cheering for a man, they were cheering for the clarity of the moment. Trump, still on the other end of the call, tried to jump back at wrong completely. Wrong. I've done more for this country than anybody. Obama's jealous, the fake news is jealous. Everybody's jealous, they're twisting the facts. And it's disgraceful. His voice cracked under the strain. Hanley looked back at the camera, signaling producers to cut the call within seconds. Trump's voice dropped off the broadcast, leaving only the image of Obama sitting calmly under the lights. The silence that followed was striking. In living rooms across America, viewers took in the stark difference in Portland. A family of 4 sat huddled on the couch. The father whispered, one gave facts. The other gave excuses. Which one do you think history is going to remember? In Tulsa, a retired teacher scribbled in her notebook. As she watched later, she'd tell her neighbors. It felt like watching a civics lesson. Live on TV, social media only amplified the contrast. Memes exploded. Obama with the caption, cooler than cooler, Trump beside the words. Shouting won't change the facts. Side-by-side screenshots spread across Instagram, TikTok and Facebook by midnight. The split screen itself had become the story in Washington. The White House strategy team worked late into the night. Draft counter-arguments. But even they admitted privately that the optics were devastating. One staffer muttered under his breath, we look like chaos next to him. Obama meanwhile wrapped up the broadcast without theatrics. He thanked Hanley, shook his hand and turned to the audience with a nod. No glow, no chest thumping. Just a quiet exit, leaving the weight of the facts behind him. The reaction in Phoenix was electric. People lingered in their seats, talking in hushed but animated tones. A mother turned to her teenage daughter saying, that's how you hold someone accountable. The daughter nodded wide as if she had just witnessed something she would never forget. And across America, the ripple spread further in diners, in Nevada, truck stops in Wyoming, and high-rise apartments in Seattle. Conversations sparked. Ordinary people were asking themselves, not just who told the truth, but who they'd actually trust in the days ahead. It wasn't just about one night's town hall. It was about an unmistakable side-by-side portrait of 2 very different versions of leadership. But the story didn't end in the studio. The real impact would come in the days that followed, when polls shifted, headlines blared, and Americans carried this debate into their homes and workplaces. By the next morning, the footage was everywhere. Newsstands in Phoenix sold out of papers before noon. The front pages plastered with the split-screen image. Obama calm and measured on the left. Trump red-faced on the right. The caption in one national paper read simply, 2 presidents, 2 realities. Cable networks replayed the clip on loop, each adding their own commentary. Some hosts dissected Obama's tone, steady, almost surgical. Others highlighted Trump's outburst, wondering aloud if the president had lost control of the narrative. But the real debate wasn't happening in TV studios. It was happening in everyday places, far from Washington or Phoenix. In a diner outside Reno, waitresses refilled coffee cups, while customers argued across the counter. Obama brought facts, one man said, stabbing his finger on a newspaper spread in front of him. He read straight from the report. You can't fake that. A woman across from him shook her head. Trump said those numbers were wrong. You think I'm gonna believe some paper over the president? Their voices rose, drawing glances from other tables at a hardware store. In Flagstaff, 2 employees stood by the cash register, watching the replay on a small TV mounted in the corner. Man, did you see his face? One said. Trump was steaming, looked like a kettle about to blow. The other replied, meanwhile, Obama looked like he was teaching Sunday school, like he didn't need to try. The story carried into classrooms too. In a high school civics class in Salt Lake City, a teacher played a short clip for her students. Afterwards, she asked, what do you notice about the way each man handled the pressure? A boy in the back raised his hand. One was calm, the other was mad. The teacher nodded, And which one made you want to listen more? The boy answered without hesitation. The calm one back in Washington. Pollsters scrambled overnight. Surveys showed a sudden spike in public trust for Obama's version of events. A poll out of Ohio had 62% of respondents saying believed Obama's numbers over Trump's claims. In Pennsylvania, 58% said the moment changed how they viewed the administration's honesty. Those weren't small shifts. They were earthquakes in political terms. Trump's inner circle met in the West Wing. The following morning, Brent Keenan slid poll result across the Resolute desk. Sir, it's not good independents are siding with Obama even. Some of our base is saying they don't know who to believe anymore. Trump's face reddened again. They'll believe me, they always believe me. These polls are fake. He waved the papers away, but his advisors knew damage was done. Meanwhile, Obama stayed quiet. No late-night tweets. No follow-up interviews. He flew back to his home in Washington. Avoiding the cameras at the airport, reporters shouted questions, but he waved politely and kept walking. His silence made the contrast even sharper. While Trump fumed, ranted, Obama's restraint seemed to magnify the weight of his words. At a church in El Paso, a pastor referenced the moment in his Sunday sermon. Truth doesn't need to shout. He told his congregation it simply needs to be spoken clearly. When lies rage, truth whispers. And still it is heard, crowd murmured. Their agreement, some nodding, some wiping their eyes. In Phoenix, where it had all happened, people still talked about the town hall days. Later, a taxi driver told his passenger, "I was there in the audience. You could feel it, man. Like he wasn't just talking politics. He was talking about us." The passenger replied softly. "That's why it hit so hard. He made it real." Social media continued. Its frenzy, memes multiplied. Late-night comedians roasted Trump's meltdown, and hashtags refused to die down. But tucked inside all the noise was something more serious. Small business owners posted their own stories confirming what Obama had said. One bakery owner in Santa Fe wrote, "We applied for aid 3 times and never saw a dollar." Meanwhile, a hotel chain down the street got millions. Obama was right, her post went viral. Shared by thousands, the story wasn't just about one explosive night anymore. It had turned into a national conversation. About honesty, about accountability, about who the government was really working for. People weren't just watching, they were participating, but the true impact wouldn't be measured in applause or memes. It would be measured in how Americans processed what they saw, and in the uncomfortable questions they started asking about leadership itself. The week that followed felt less like politics and more like a reckoning. Every news outlet ran think pieces. Every podcast dissected the exchange. And every talk radio host tried to frame the moment in their own terms. Yet beneath all the noise, ordinary people were asking a simple question. Who can we trust when the stakes are this high? At a small factory in Toledo, workers on their lunch break gathered around a break room. TV. One man, Grease, still on his hands, shook his head as the clip replayed again. "You know what gets me? He didn't yell, he didn't wave his arms. He just read the numbers. And it hit harder than all that shouting." Another worker replied, "That's because it wasn't about him. It was about us." In Phoenix, the local paper ran an editorial titled, "Facts, Don't Yell." The column noted Obama's composure allowed the numbers to carry their own weight, while Trump's reaction only magnified the contrast. Americans aren't just tired of being lied to. The article read, "They're tired of being shouted at." Meanwhile, Washington insiders spun their wheels. Some Republican strategists quietly admitted that the optics were devastating. "It's not that people love Obama," one strategist said off the record. "It's that he made Trump look out of control. And voters hate chaos." Democrats, on the other hand, treaded carefully, wary of appearing to gloat. They knew the moment belonged to Obama himself, not the party. Poll after poll confirmed what people already sensed in Florida. Nearly 60% of independents said they believed Obama over Trump. In Michigan, trust in the administration's economic messaging dropped by double digits. The numbers were staggering, and even pro-Trump outlets struggled to dismiss them. But beyond the data, there was something deeper at play. Americans were reflecting on what leadership really meant. At a community center in Boise, a retired Army sergeant spoke to a group of young veterans. "When you're in command, you don't scream at your men to follow, you show them the way. That's the difference we saw on TV." One man showed the other. Screamed churches. Schools and offices echoed similar conversations. Parents used the moment to teach their kids about honesty. Teachers brought it up as a real-world civics lesson. Even late-night comedians, quick with jokes, circled back to the same point. Shouting doesn't equal strength. For many, the bigger picture was less about politics and more about character. Obama had shown that truth could be powerful. Without theatrics, Trump had shown that defensiveness can reveal more than words. And together two had created an unintentional masterclass on contrast. In Denver, a small business owner was interviewed. Outside her closed cafe, I lost everything waiting for that relief money that never came. And when I saw Obama hold up those numbers, I felt like someone finally saw us not just as statistics, but as people. Her words made the evening news, amplifying the sense that this wasn't just a battle between two men. It was a mirror held up to the nation inside the White House. Trump's aides scrambled to keep him on message, urging him to pivot to other topics. But he refused night after night. He returned to the town hall, blasting Obama in rallies and interviews, calling him a liar, a fraud, even demanding an investigation. Each time, though, it backfired. The more he ranted, the calmer Obama's original delivery seemed. In comparison, Obama, for his part, didn't fan the flames. He stayed silent, releasing no statements, giving no interviews. His restraint spoke volumes. The silence left space for Americans to reflect, to replay the clip, to decide for themselves what they believed. By the end of the week, analysts were calling it a turning point in perception. One commentator on TV summarized it best: sometimes the truth doesn't need amplification. It just needs contrast, and in this case, the contrast couldn't have been starker. In living rooms, in lunchrooms, in break rooms, across the nation, that lesson stuck. People talked less about politics and more about values, calm over chaos, facts over fury, patience over panic. But as the dust settled, one question lingered: what would this moment mean for the future? Not just for the two men, but for the country they both claimed to represent. By the end of that turbulent week, America wasn't just replaying clips on their phones, was rethinking what it meant to lead. The contrast between Obama and Trump had been broadcast into millions of living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces, and the country couldn't stop talking about it. The words weren't complicated. The delivery wasn't flashy, but that's what made it powerful. In a grocery store parking lot in Mesa, Arizona, two men loaded bags into their cars. While rehashing the broadcast, "I'm no Obama fan," one admitted, slamming his trunk shut. "But you can't argue with the paper he held up." "That wasn't spin," the other man shrugged. "Yeah, and yelling into a phone doesn't make the bills any easier to pay." Their exchange wasn't unique. From small towns to big cities, people were saying the same thing. One man looked like he was thinking about the people, the other about himself. Commentators tried to put the moment into neat sound bites, but the truth was bigger than a headline. It wasn't just about one night in Phoenix. It was about trust, about how Americans gauge honesty when the stakes are survival, not politics. A bakery owner in Santa Fe summed it up on a local radio call: "In show, we don't need someone to scream at us. We need someone to tell us the truth. If it stings, that's leadership." Meanwhile, Trump's voice still echoed across rallies and phone-ins, his frustration spilling out in long, angry monologues. He dismissed Obama's numbers, dismissed the polls, dismissed the growing skepticism from everyday Americans. But the more he shouted, people seemed to listen. It wasn't about partisanship anymore. It was about tone, about trust, about the difference between noise and clarity. Obama, true to form, stayed quiet. He returned to private life, giving no interviews, making no statements. His silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. By steppers back, he allowed the moment to grow larger than himself. His calm demeanor during the town hall, and his refusal to pile on afterward, gave the impression of a man confident enough to let the facts carry their own weight. In homes across America, the lesson sank. In a single mother in Fresno told kids at dinner, "Pay attention to who stays calm when things get tough. That's the person you can count on." A retired firefighter in Minneapolis told his grandson, "When you're telling the truth, you don't have to scream. People can feel it." The town hall became more than just political theater. It became a teaching moment. It reminded Americans that leadership isn't about volume, but about clarity, not about deflecting blame, but about owning reality. And it highlighted a truth that too often gets buried in noise. Facts don't bend to anger. Days later, one poster called it "The night calm beat chaos." For many watching at home, it was simpler than that. It was the moment they realized that the loudest person in the room isn't always the most honest. Sometimes it's the one who barely raises his voice. And maybe that's the moral buried in all the shouting. And statistics in moments of crisis don't want theatrics. They want truth. They want someone who respects them enough to lay it out plainly, even when it hurts. So as the dust settled, one question remained. For every viewer, every voter, every citizen: when push comes to shove, Who do you trust to tell you the truth? The answer to that question will shape more than elections. It will shape the future of the country. That's the lesson. From Phoenix, a night when a sheet of paper said, more than 1,000 tweets, when patience beat panic, and when Americans were reminded that real strength doesn't need to shout in. And if you've stayed with me through this story, take a moment to think about what it means for you. How do you measure honesty? In the people you trust, how do you separate noise from truth? Those are questions worth asking, not just in politics, but in everyday life. If this story made you think, if it made you feel the weight of that contrast, then don't forget, subscribe to the channel, because the conversations we're having here aren't just about politics. They're about life, about trust, about the kind of world we want to leave behind. And there are more stories like this, real, raw, and revealing coming your way. Truth doesn't need to shout it, just needs someone willing to hear it.